all of the major nations dropped their Olympic rosters over the weekend, and there were some pretty glaring omissions, one of which I already talked about on this channel, but there were a few others that either went under the radar or have been a bit under-discussed. So today I want to talk about the 10 biggest snubs that were made by Olympic rosters, and the 10 players that the teams idiotically decided to take instead of the players who were most deserving. And this video is going to be mostly focused on the big four at four nations: US, Canada, Sweden, and Finland, just because I don't think that the Czechs and the Germans really had that deep of a roster that they were passing over, since all of those teams took the most obvious candidates. But we're going to start with the big snub that I dedicated a whole video to, which was Jason Robertson not making Team USA. They instead elected to take either Vinny Trocheck or JT Miller. I think that Robertson was more deserving than either of those two by an absolute mile. And I won't belabor the point too much here because I did a whole video on it, but basically, Robo's a point-a-game player. He's pretty solid defensively, a bit underrated even, and taking him over defensive specialists like Miller and Vinny Trocheck, who is awful defensively and nowhere near the offensive player that Robertson is, just doesn't make sense. But on that same vein, let's say you swapped out Trocheck for Robertson. I still think that there's another American player who got snubbed and should have gone over JT Miller, and that's Montreal Canadiens forward Cole Caulfield. Like Robertson, Caulfield has nearly as many goals as JT Miller has points, 20 goals to 22 points, and 40 points point-a-game player this season. And while you could say that they need JT Miller for his defense and penalty killing, Cole Caulfield's not only not bad defensively, he's actually incredibly good according to Hockey Stat Cards. He's in almost the 95th percentile of defensive ratings, and he, in my opinion, would be another powerhouse to add to a loaded US roster that has to be able to score and keep up with Canada. And speaking of Canada, they made some bad decisions of their own, and the most notable one is going to come in goal, where they took Jordan Binnington over Mackenzie Blackwood of the Colorado Avalanche. And I know what you're thinking. Jordan Binnington was the starting goaltender for Canada at Four Nations. He was incredibly clutch in those games. Why wouldn't they take him to the Olympics? Because Four Nations was last year, and this year Jordan Binnington has been absolutely awful. The guy is the second worst starting goaltender in the NHL when it comes to goals saved above expected per 60, whereas Mackenzie Blackwood is literally the best goaltender in the NHL in that category. I'm glad that they took Logan Thompson, and I'm glad Darcy Kemper also got a nod, but when it comes to goaltenders, you have to ride the hot hand, and Jordan Binnington this year has been ice cold. He's been Mr. Freeze. I would not have taken him on this roster, and the fact that he's probably going to be the presumptive starter really worries me if I'm a Canada fan. And along those same lines, another guy who's a holdover from the Four Nations roster who I don't think should have made the team, who's also a St. Louis Blue, is Colton Parayko. And I know it's not Parayko's fault that he's the #1 defenseman on a really bad Blues team, but his ratings this year, particularly his offensive rating when it comes to Hockey Stat Cards, have been absolutely abysmal. And you know who they left at home? One of the literal best offensive defensemen in the NHL, in Jacob Chychrun of the Washington Capitals. And yes, I'm a bit biased as a Caps fan, and the leader of the Jacob Chychrun should be in Norris Trophy conversations club, but I don't know what you're getting from Parayko that you're not getting from Drew Doughty or Shea Theodore or Devon Taves. That's even better in my opinion. Sticking with defensemen though, there's one snub that is incredibly egregious, and it didn't come from the US or Canada. It came from Sweden. Simon Edvinsson somehow didn't make the team, but Oliver Ekman-Larsson did. And that to me is just astoundingly stupid by Sweden. Edvinsson has been Detroit's best defenseman not named Mo Seider, a great player on both ends of the ice, while Oliver Ekman-Larsson has been atrocious defensively, and I do not exaggerate that. And yeah, I know Sweden might want a little bit of scoring from the back line, but you already have Erik Karlsson and even guys like Dahlin and Victor Hedman in a pinch. You do not need to take a guy like Oliver Ekman-Larsson, who is so bad this year in his own zone. And speaking of the Swedes, they also made two questionable forward decisions, sort of similar to the US in bringing some veterans in Rickard Rakell and Elias Lindholm. Both of these guys have been stalwart players for Sweden over the past, but this year they have not been nearly as good as some of the other options out there. One who's a veteran is Marcus Johansson, who's been playing absolutely incredible for the Minnesota Wild this year. I think he'd be a very clear upgrade over Elias Lindholm as a bottom to middle six center or winger. And then for Rakell, I think that whatever he does, William Eklund just does a whole lot better. William Eklund's been a with 26 points in the year. And yeah, I know he's not as good defensively as Raquel has been this season, but you're a team that already has a lot of very solid two-way forwards. I think you could afford to bring a guy who adds a little bit more offensive punch in William Eklund. And let's go back to Team USA, because not only did they make some egregious choices on the front end, they did so on the back end. And of course, you know that I'm talking about Adam Fox. He has been one of the 5 best defensemen in the NHL this year. 24 assists and 28 points on the year, and a very good defensive defenseman in his own right. They take guys like Noah Hannafin and Jacob Slavin over him. Does not make any sense. Those are 2 fine players, but they're not nearly at the level of Adam Fox. I would have passed over Hannafin for him, and then also I would have left Jacob Slavin at home. Nobody's really talking about why is John Carlson not on this team. Everything that Slavin does, Carlson can just do so much better, and I know that this year has been rough for him defensively, but as far as driving offense from the blue line, he would add an incredible amount of punch for Team USA. Maybe you could argue that they really don't need a lot of offensive punch with guys like Werenski, Hughes. Now adding a guy like Fox is kind of redundant, but he's been a veteran of Olympics and World Junior Championships, scoring the game-winning goal back in 2011. The choice is between him and Jacob Slavin. I'm taking John Carlson personally. And then finally, yes, let's address it. For Team Canada, Mark Scheifele not making this team over Anthony Cirelli, or I'll also throw out Braden Point there as a possibility, is pretty egregious to me. Scheifele has been one of the hottest scoring forwards this year, way above Point and Cirelli, either of whom have eclipsed 30 points this year, while Scheifele's already flirting with 50. And I know he's not good defensively, but Cirelli and Point have not been that great in their own zone this year either. You cannot pass up on a guy that dynamic offensively for the sake of defense if you're not taking 2 guys who are exceptional defensively. One of the most egregious snubs of any Olympic team thus far.